From Radio DePaul, Chicago's college connection.
My father spent 3 years restoring this car. It is his love. It is his passion.
I'm Michael Cera, and human skin is my passion.
I learned to feel things I'd never felt before. Love, jealousy, passion for disemboweling.
Look at all the passion on that wall.
Well, jazz flute has always been a small passion of mine.
It's a bathroom.
It's not just a bathroom, David. It's a passion project.
My passion project. Destroying someone else's passion project.
This is Passion Project with your host, Peyton Basden.
Passion Project indeed, my friend. Welcome back. Welcome back, beloved listeners. Welcome back to myself. I have also returned to this week's episode of Passion Project. First and foremost, I want to say it's great to be here. It is a pretty, I was going to say a beautiful Saturday. It's actually really snowy, but it was warmer than it was yesterday, so it feels nicer than it actually is. And I'm trying to take that nice energy with me throughout the day today and write in a few lives, have a few insightful conversations. And I thought, what better way to do that than having a brand new guest on the show? So that's exactly what I did. And lo and behold, in front of me, we have somebody who is new to the show, first time being on the show, to my knowledge. I don't think you've been here before.
No, I have not.
No. And a very interesting person, a very cool person. Dare I say, awesome, smart, funny, talented.
You may.
Cool as heck.
I'll take it.
Yeah, you'll take it. Who are you? Who's here? Who we got?
Hello, my name is Justin Jacobs, and I am I'm a comedy arts major. I'm a fourth-year comedy arts major here at DePaul.
Shout out.
Yeah, and I'm a musician. I'm a composer, lyricist. Silly cat.
Yeah.
Roaming around the streets of Chicago.
Oh, yeah. I always see you walking down those alleys late at night.
Yeah, with my piano.
Yeah, with your piano.
Yeah, that I take everywhere.
Doing like jaunty things.
Yeah, exclusively jaunty.
Yes, exclusively. Yeah. To get the audience a bit of a sense of what it's like in your dark, twisted mind.
Yes.
We have
the depths.
the deep, dark depths. We have this segment on the show called the Passion Probe. Now, these questions will start easy, and they'll get a little bit more difficult.
Oh.
But I ensure you can answer all of them with the utmost accuracy.
I'm shaking, but I believe you.
Yeah. And starting off small, starting off first, but also starting off difficult, do you have a preference for cats or dogs?
Ooh, I'm going to say dogs.
Okay.
Definitely dogs. I've only ever had dogs, and I definitely know dogs more than I know cats.
Have you had a meaningful relationship with a cat?
No. And I think that's really what informed my answer. I've also always had this thing, like, I have no problems with cats, but my thing is always like, if I'm gonna get a pet, I want a pet that wants to be around me.
Yes.
And not a pet that I have to force at threat of being clawed and mauled to be around me. Because if I'm going to spend all that money and take care of you and pay for your medical bills and feed you, I'd like you to cuddle and not hate me.
That's I think that's a fairly reasonable request.
Yeah, not that cats exclusively hate, but they can.
They're a lot better at it.
They're a lot better at it.
Yeah, I will grant you that. Okay, Justin, do you have a favorite number?
I would say 8.
8.
8.
8.
8, I think, has always been my go-to favorite number.
Anything about it that draws you towards it?
I think that I made the decision a while ago because of like the infinity symbol.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So like 8 to me has always just been an inverted infinity symbol, and I've always just liked the concept of the infinity symbol. I think also it just like rolls off the tongue really well.
Right.
Like for instance, my least favorite number, ironically, is actually 7.
Oh.
And I think it's because it's like hard to say. I think.
Yeah, it's
7.
2 syllables.
It's 2 syllables, so already very difficult.
Yeah, already twice as hard as
and then
8.
it's just very, it's hissy, and then like you go from it's so front of the mouth, 7. Or
Yeah.
ven, which I guess is its own debate. Is it 7 or 7?
I say 7.
I say 7 too.
Yeah.
But
now I'm thinking about it. Am I saying 7 or 7?
someone out there's disagreeing with us. I'm sure of it.
Well, they're not here now, and we officially agree that it is 7 from here on henceforth. Alas, good answer. Eight's a great number.
Hey, thanks.
I'll say it. Okay. Do you have a favorite breakfast food?
Oh boy, hash browns.
Okay.
Absolutely, hash browns.
Do you have a particular style of hash browns you enjoy? Because I've seen them done a few different ways.
Yeah, okay. So this might start its own debate.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer like actual hash browns to like the stuff that they make in like Dunkin' Donuts, or like the patties that people buy.
Yeah.
I think a hash brown should be shredded potatoes that are then sort of made in a skillet.
Just yeah.
Like when you like go to a diner and they hand you that plate, it's that classic thing where when you order hash browns at a diner, you kind of have to guess what they mean, because sometimes they bring you potato wedges and sometimes they bring you shreds.
Yeah.
I think the shreds are the answer.
I most commonly equate those with hash browns, but like I'll go to a restaurant and order hash browns and I'll get little chunks.
Yeah, I don't know what the distinguisher is.
Is it the style? Like you're browning the hash.
I think
like in the pan.
I think that home style is the term for the wedges. That is what I've found. But also, what does that mean? How did that
home? Are you
how did that
styling this after?
Whose home was this coined in, and why are they not known?
Right.
Right. I would think if I managed to make such an influential thing out of cutting potatoes into wedges, I'd probably go through the trouble of having it known to the world.
Right. But hey,
But
perhaps we have an unsung hero on our hands.
But
we salute you today.
I salute shredded potato hash browns.
Shredded potato hash browns are beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah, they give me life.
They do.
They give me life.
Okay. Our last question for today's pro. This one's a bit of a thinker.
Okay.
But I like this question a lot, and I'd be interested to get your take on it. So, a few years ago, a movie came out called Yesterday.
Oh.
In which the world forgot the Beatles existed, and one man took it upon himself to recreate their entire discography.
Yes,
so my question to you, is there a musical artist that you wish you could yesterday and like recreate their discography?
Wow. Great question. I think I have to say David Bowie.
Oh, awesome.
I just have to. Now, this comes with the caveat that I think if I, much as I would argue should have occurred in that film, single-handedly recreated the discography of David Bowie in a world absent of David Bowie, David Bowie would not be the cultural icon that David Bowie is. Because I am not David Bowie. And but I think I would have to say David Bowie, just on the simple fact that if I think I had to be a like solo musical act, singer-songwriter kind of thing, and I didn't have the like glam and the characters and the like performance art of it all, I think I would just get bored, to be honest with you.
Right.
And I think I would give up before I had completed their discography. Yeah. I think that's
a great answer. Do you think you go deep enough on David Bowie to faithfully recreate?
I think I could pull it off with about 75% accuracy.
That's not bad.
Without ever, because I guess in the scenario you can't actually go back and listen
No.
Because they don't exist
No,
anymore.
No, you can't double check.
I think I could do it with about 75% accuracy. That would sell at about 40% what they did. So I don't think I would do David Bowie justice, but I do think I'd make a good David Bowie.
Okay. And that's what it's all about. You'd be you.
Yeah.
In the
in the skin of David Bowie.
Yes. He would be gone, but his skin would be left behind.
Yeah.
So you could put it on.
I could definitely pull off the eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, the eye is my favorite part about David Bowie. I think I've always had a theory that if David Bowie had normal eyes, and I know that that's a weighted term, but if David Bowie had normal eyes, I don't think he would have sold as many albums. But that's just a me thought.
And that's a beautiful glimpse inside your mind, as is the point of the Passion Probe. It all comes full circle. And speaking of coming around, we're coming around to today's topic, which is very musically related. It's about musicals, if you will, specifically writing them, which when you tell somebody, I'm writing a musical, that could mean so many things to so many different people. What does that mean to you? What are you coming in today? Like, what are the prevailing thoughts in your brain?
Sure. So for me, I write musical comedies. So primarily sort of like, I guess you could call it, I've used the term romps before.
Romp?
I think that the kind of musicals that I write are very like classic musical theater, where it is very silly and the emphasis is primarily on like how ridiculous this all is and making people laugh with that. As opposed to, I guess, I think that especially in the past 10 to 20 years, there's been a particular push into, I think, more like, what would you call it? Like story musicals, where like the point is like, wow, this incredible story. And then there's like music along with it. Like that's kind of how I feel about well, I don't want to start debates about what musicals are, what kind of musicals and things, but like I guess that's how I feel about like something like Come From Away, where like it totally could have been a play and I think it would have been fine as a play, but then the music does add something to it. Is it traditionally what I would think of when I would think of a musical? Probably not. That doesn't mean anything or disqualify it, but so in that vein, if I'm not Come From Away, I think I'm probably like what I write is closer to something like maybe The Producers or I mean, terrible example, but Book of Mormon and things like that. Yeah.
So is that where this journey sort of started for you? Did you watch stuff like that and did that sort of prime you to be like, wow, I am interested in creating something like this?
Yeah, so it's interesting actually. I started in both music and theater so late. I did my first theater show because theater came first. I did my first theater show in 8th grade. I had never even considered doing it up until then, and it was Annie, and I played Rooster Hannigan, and boy did I play Rooster Hannigan.
Awesome.
And once I got into that because I did voice lessons. And so I started to discover some shows through voice lessons, and I've always been sort of like a comedy person. So naturally, like my voice teacher was like, look at this Sondheim, look at this, listen to how beautiful this melody is. You should do Giants in the Sky. And I always was like not super interested in it because like people would lean in and go, oh, how beautiful. And I was like, no, I want you to laugh. And then my freshman year of high school is when I got into music, and it started ironically, well, not ironically, but totally different things. I got into like Bo Burnham music and things like that, and sort of musical comedians, and I started going, well, their songs aren't terribly complicated, and I had no idea how to play piano or what anything in music was. To be honest with you, I think in freshman year of high school when I started music, I don't think I could have actually named the letters that are the notes in music. I don't think I could have told you with any accuracy what those letters are. And now we're here. And I think the journey kind of started for me in how hard it seemed to be. Because I guess I understood how comedy worked, I understood how music worked, but there was sort of this thing of like, wow, what an achievement to like write a script that is good and also that is funny and also it's all set to music and also it's tightly rehearsed. And I didn't know how to do any of those things, and so naturally I went, well, I must do all of them because I had too much time on my hands.
Fair, yeah. And so you did any of those things come to you first, or like where did you start by saying, hey, I'm going to try and learn piano because that seems like a first step, or were you like, nah, I'm gonna make a musical and then work backwards from that?
Yeah, it's funny. Which maybe is not what you should do. I started learning how to write music to write a musical. I like sat down. I also, in that same vein, really learned how to write a script while writing a musical. And I wrote this musical that like it doesn't even exist anymore because I never finished it because it was a terrible idea. But I wrote this musical that like kind of, it was like Lord of the Flies, except instead of taking place in a forest, it's a mall that gets caved in by like a snowstorm on Black Friday. And so the whole thing was just like, oh, we're doing a parody of Lord of the Flies. And it's a funny idea, but it didn't go anywhere. But I had it very early on, and I was like, this is silly. And so I started like writing a script, and I started writing songs. And songs is polite because I couldn't play chords even on a piano. So I would just hit a note, and I would be like, that sounds kind of like what's in my head. And I would sort of go from there. Now, in that vein, when I started sort of learning, I obviously didn't know what I was doing. Which I will say, if you are interested in learning specifically piano, take lessons, because it's the easiest thing to do if you can afford it and have the access. But so the way I started, again, going back to Bo Burnham and comedy music, is I would pick out a song that was either I love the sound of this song or this sounds like what I'm trying to do. And I would look up what the chords were. And so I would study, okay, so they're playing, not to get languagey, but okay, so that's an A flat. And then what are these other two notes? And then discovering that, oh, those two notes, which in music theory for a triad, which is just a normal chord, we would call the 3 and the 5. So figuring out that there's a relationship between those notes occurred as I started to learn chords. And it took me a while to really put it together because I didn't really know what I was doing. But all that to say that I think that you can learn how to do things like write music or write scripts or write your show or whatever it is that you have the idea for without necessarily like having a background in anything. Not that I am like your shining pinnacle of that exemplified. But like, you know, I think that a lot of people don't consider it or turn away from doing something like this because it's very lofty and it's crazy. And it's like, if you don't have any experience doing any of that, like, how are you ever going to do it? And I hear that. I will say, however, that I've spent the past 7 years of my life, everything I do was based around learning how to do those things. So it sort of, I think everybody has their own journey. And I think that the arts in particular sometimes can feel a little gatekeepy, where it's like, well, you don't know how that works, so you shouldn't be doing it. And so I think a lot of what I do is sort of trying to see, not what can I get away with, but like, if none of those rules were real, what could I accomplish? And just kind of going for it. So it's very experimental in that way.
Right. You know, and that's interesting because I feel like that's always a part of the journey of like discovery in this idea that I want to do this thing, but I feel like I can't. But nobody's ever actually telling you can't,
Right.
except for you, because you're like, it's like, I don't think I should be able to do this. Like, this is something other people do. But like
Right.
that idea of coming into yourself in a way that is like this self-actualization is really beautiful.
Yeah.
Was there a moment on your journey where you felt like, I've finally done this thing? Or like, it's like, have you reached that point yet where you're like, oh, I think I can consider myself a person who does this?
Sure. I think the first thing I'll say is that like you never stop failing. You fail constantly. You will reach a point where you'll fail and other people in the room will be like, that's incredible. And you'll be like, sure it is. Yeah. Where failure becomes a bit subjective, I think. But then in that vein, I think that it comes in waves. I think that the best way, especially if you are someone who's like, I want to write a musical, and that's a crazy, out of the blue, like crazy idea for you, someone who people might think like, why are you doing that? The best thing you can do is like set a goal, right? And maybe that goal early on is like, I want a song written. And there's no complexity to it. It's just like, I write a song. And then you'll write that song. And when it's bad, you'll go, okay, that's bad. Now that you know that it's bad, you can figure out why it's bad. And it could be that you have no idea how music theory works. And so it's bad because it just sounds bad. It could also, on top of that, be, oh, well, this lyric doesn't really rhyme with this lyric, and I don't know why I didn't clock that when I was writing the song. I think that the in point is when you start doing it. And that's really scary, of course, but you don't grow until you do it. And then once you do it, you can start to fail. And then when you fail, you can start to get better. And so I think that I've had a couple points where I'm like, oh wow, I'm like doing this. I just obviously you were a part of it, Peyton. I just opened a fully sort of realized production of an original musical. Shout out Witch Please.
Shout out.
A gay romp in 1692 Salem. Follow her on Instagram. And so that was really powerful for me, especially with the background I have and sort of how little I have devoted of my life and time to like knowing how to do this stuff. That felt like a big moment for me of like, okay, so this is a thing I can do and I can only get better from here. But I think not to be facetious, I guess, but I think that the point at which you go, oh, I'm doing this now, is the point that you sort of die creatively. Because I think like as soon as I feel like I've done it or I've accomplished it, I move on to the next thing, or I move on to something that I don't know how to do anymore. And that is sort of just how I operate. And it's why I think in particular, like I've found a fair amount of success in like this weird approach of like, I don't know how to do this, let's do it. But I will say that like, I think you will learn exponentially more from that approach than you will from like, well, I dress myself well, so for this theater show I should only do costumes. Because like you'd be great at costumes, but you're probably not going to learn a whole lot,
right?
So it's that sort of thing.
Is that something you try and do, that you center in a new process if you're starting one or a new writing? Are you like, okay, this is something I've seen happen in a musical that I want to try and emulate, or this is something I haven't explored yet musically or in the structure of a story like plays? Is that where you will start when you're trying to like create something new, or like where do your great ideas come from?
Where do my great ideas come from? Well, they are just so great. I think for me that like again, I think it's hard to talk about musical theater without sounding pretentious. I think that I read a lot. Like a mix of things. So like a lot of fiction, a lot of nonfiction. And I just look for, I think about more than anything, my ideas come from thoughts and like ideas that people hold. So, for instance, when I wrote Witch Please, it was coming from a place of like, what does a group of people who are completely governed by fear look like? Because on the one hand, it sounds really scary. On the other hand, really funny, depending on the way it is sort of conveyed and put together. I think that I stick to things that I find personally interesting. So I'm a big like horror comedy writer, and it's because a lot of my work, as just stated, deals with concepts of fear and like the uncomfortable and stuff like that. I've always been a huge fan of horror and monsters and those sorts of stories because I think that they're some of the most human stories that are out there. Like, don't get me wrong, I love like Company, but like at the end of the day, it's this one guy just getting yelled at by a bunch of people, and it's set to like music that's great, you know. But I do think it starts to feel at a certain point like just your life on stage, and I think that I try to look for things that are a little more fantastical, because I think that people can reflect easier when they're not feeling so directly confronted. So when the story they're being presented with feels a little more silly or zany or out there or removed from their experience, I think that they can have an easier time being receptive to, you know, ideas that we touched on in that show, like, you know, sort of coming out stories and just like generational gaps of communication and things like that. So, yeah, I think that's where a lot of my stuff comes from. I don't write from a musical place. I sort of have to know the story before anything else can happen.
Right. And getting into like that side of the process, perhaps like the more logistical angle, you have an idea for a show, and then you start with trying to make a script. At what point do you start introducing music? Like, will you ever, like, in that process be like, okay, I'm writing this scene, I think this is where a song should be.
Sure.
Like, you keep, like, how do you introduce and sort of, like, layer these elements? Like, how do you know when you're writing this story, like, oh, this needs to be a musical. This isn't a play. This isn't, like, a short film. Like, this is meant for the stage.
Right. I think it's kind of a hard question to answer almost, because I think it is so open to interpretation and style depending on the composer or the writer or whatever. My thing is always that on a sort of da-da level, the story itself should feel ridiculous enough that if they're not singing, it's weird. You know what I mean? On a more like useful level, I guess, obviously we talk often in musical theater spaces about this idea that like the point when the character stops talking and starts singing is the point when the emotion of what they're saying sort of takes over, and the state that they're in becomes so hard for them to process themselves that the only way to get through it is to spontaneously burst into song. That's a little silly, of course, but what I've always interpreted as is those moments in life where you wish that a hand would come out of the sky and give you what you're looking for. For me, the song in a musical is the relief. So often I find myself placing songs at points in the script where if they didn't sing, it would maybe be uncomfortable to watch. A lot of, I think if you think about a lot of musical theater songs, they either deal with subject matter that is uncomfortable, or they deal with points in the character's journey that is like so like awful that it's ridiculous. And so I think that it's definitely on the one hand, like we just talked about, an energy thing, but then it is also a sort of, okay, time to hold the audience's hand kind of thing of like, obviously most songs occur in musicals at like the point that the character starts to figure out what they're going to do next.
Yeah.
And so I think in that sense, thinking of the song as the vehicle to get from that, the point of what do I do to I know what I'm going to do is I would say a great way to start thinking about where to place songs if you're writing a musical, specifically because the music should be about keeping the energy up. There's no greater, I think, energy death in a musical than the point where we finish a song and we go into dialogue, because immediately it's like, we're done singing, okay. And then, there's that classic joke of the audience just sits and waits patiently until the band starts playing again. But I think it is very much that sort of thing of like, it's those high energy moments that I think you have to find on your own. But you'll know where they are in it. And when you know the characters are writing well enough, I think that you do arrive at a point of like, it should feel, I think, like you don't want to write that monologue, but you would love to write that song. Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. In your process, you don't have any sort of like co-writer. You don't have, you aren't one of those classic songwriting duos of ye old musical history past. What is the process like for you? Writing solely from like your own vision, like how do you like, because I find oftentimes when I write it is just me and there are moments of like, is this actually working, is this actually
sure
like, so what is it like creating these things by yourself? Like, are there advantages, disadvantages?
Sure. It's lonely. I'll say that. You do, I think, at a certain point start to feel like you're going insane, especially when you're writing something larger or something that, like, you care about. I do think you reach a point where you're like, does this mean anything? Do I care too much? Am I too close? I think one of the best parts about, for me, not having a writing partner, specifically with these projects, is complete creative control, obviously. So, like, on the one hand, that means that, like, I can look at a moment, for example, and think, oh, this song's high energy, so it needs to be a patter song. They need to be, singing super fast, and we wonder when the actor will breathe. Or this song is totally an I want song. This character is literally explaining to us the thing they want more than anything else in the world. And then what it will sound like and things like that. And the beautiful thing about that is that every day as a composer, I think you're discovering sort of melodies and sounds that you like. And so it gives you a lot of opportunity to do that. One of my favorite things that I got to do with Which Please, which we keep talking about, is inserting a heartbeat as the bass drum for a couple of tracks. And that was just a sort of motif in that show of the heartbeat speeding up and slowing down and speaking to the fear, which, when you get scared, your heartbeat goes up. When you calm, your heartbeat goes down, and things like that. On the other hand of not having a writing partner, it opens you up to failure a lot more, because you don't have someone there to go, this is a song that already exists, or I think this technique has been used before, or even disregarding like originality, it would work better if you did it this way. Now, I think that there are some people who really enjoy that and really gravitate towards the immediate feedback of, does this work, does this not work? For me, there is a benefit in figuring it out in the only way I know how to do, and only then learning if it doesn't. Because then I can still understand what I was trying to do. So if it mechanically doesn't work, I can pivot without compromising the idea or the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think I find a lot with writing partners that you do a lot of compromise,
Right.
because you have to.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're trying to tell a story that is so musical, compromising can be hard, especially when you get into things of like if you're working with someone who is less musical than you, or the opposite, where you are the less musical person trying to pitch your ideas to somebody who is more musical, and you don't know where the balance goes, or if this music thing that you're saying is like a good idea. Because I find sometimes people will just be like, well, it needs to be faster, or it needs to be like louder, or whatever. And then it's up to the music person to figure out what that's supposed to mean exactly. Yeah. So I think that there's, I would say those are the pros and cons of both.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's really, at the end of the day, obviously up to you, the individual, to figure out what works best for you. For me, I live and work best in the ether of trusting my own intuition,
mm-hmm.
and then hoping it doesn't lead me astray. And sometimes it does. Sometimes you spend 3 weeks writing one song, and then you realize it doesn't work at all, and it's terrible. And you never get to see it come to life, and it's unfortunate. But the final thing I'll say is that when you are in that space and you are totally alone, and it's just sort of resting on your shoulders, there is something to be said about how much more you will learn. Because when you fail and it's just you, there's nowhere else to place the blame.
Mm-hmm.
You have to just sit down and go, all right, so what do I need to do differently?
Right.
And I think that there's something very actionable about it that I like.
Yeah. In the process of writing, particularly music, you were talking about like the sort of ideas that like when you're communicating like how this song should be in the show. How does that come to you when you're writing a piece of music in a musical? You're like, okay, I've reached this point in the story.
Mm-hmm.
I know this song is going to be a bigger number. It's going to be a beat because that's what we're trying to do.
Right.
Where do you go from there? Do you like starting with things like lyrics, or do you like pulling like influences of like, oh, this number from this musical was phenomenal, let me try and pull some of that?
Sure.
Like tonally, I think this show is in like this genre of music, so how do I combine those? Like how does all that work together?
Sure. Yeah. I think you talked about sort of pulling from another show. I think that is a unspoken thing in music that everybody does, and a lot of people don't like to admit, which is that people steal all the time. Because the reality is you can't copyright a chord progression.
Mm-hmm.
You can only obviously copyright the song itself. And there is something to be said about like listening to a track. I think in music spaces sometimes we call it a reference track, where you'll pull it up and you'll hear sort of a motif like do 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 do, you know, Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And you'll like just think on it, and there's something right about it. Of course, I engineered the melody for our Sacrifice in Which Please, actually from the Twilight Zone. That sort of do 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 do, which is so close to do 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 do. And I think that it goes back to an energy thing. And reference tracks I think can be especially helpful for people like me who, when they were first starting out, like couldn't sit at a piano and go, all right, so we're in the Dorian mode, and that means we have to play this one and this one, who like don't have all that knowledge to fall back on of like, well, this is supposed to be a jazz standard, so we're never going to go to this chord.
Of course, yeah.
Which is a joke for jazz people, the idea that you would ever not go somewhere. But
Awesome.
I think that that's just something I wanted to say because, like, steal. Reference tracks are great. Everyone does it, and you should do it. It's great, and also a great learning opportunity of like analyzing how it is, and like professional musicians make transcripts of other songs so they can figure out what the musician did here, so they can get better. But to your point about like where do we go once we have this idea, I think I start lyrically, as I would say maybe 50% of composers do, because I think you get 50% who are like, I got to do the lyrics first, and 50% who are like, I got to do the music first. I start lyrically because the lyrics will tell me a couple of things. They'll tell me how quick the song feels like it should be. They'll tell me sort of the energy, and then they'll tell me sort of the tone, and something I guess we talk about in comedy arts of like the POV, like what are we singing about, right? So, for instance, if I'm like I did for this show, if I'm writing a song about like burning witches, right? On paper, when you hear that, you might think, okay, so it's scary and it's or it's mean or it's antagonistic or it's villainous and sinister. For comedy purposes, I flipped the script on that and I went, no, like they're burning a witch as a community that's scared of witches, so it's a very happy song for them. And so once you start to write out the lyrics, the best thing you can do is you can keep track of your syllable count. So you'll go, okay, so in this line, there's 8 syllables. In this line, there's 8 syllables. This one, there's 10. And then the last one, there's 8. And that's your chorus or whatever. Now, without even having to write any music, you know that you have to be working in a time signature and a tempo that can accommodate saying 8 syllables of words. And of course, there will be people out there who will argue, well, you can do anything in anything. And that's true. You can write Not Getting Married Today and make it a patter song and have the actor have to sing, 30 words every 6 seconds. That's true. That's a thing you can choose to do. But it's good to know that you're making that choice, as opposed to writing 20 syllables and then going, wait, why does this work in nothing? Sort of thing. So I start with lyrics because on the one hand, it helps me figure out the music. But on the second hand, because I'm not someone with a formal music education, it really helps me figure out what the music needs to do, because I can't fall back on that sort of years and years of like classical music knowledge and training and things like that.
Right. Because there's so many elements always at work in a musical, and I think that's what makes it so exciting. How does your show change or your idea change once you start putting all these things together? Because I have you been in a place where like you made a song kind of in a vacuum, where like this is the best song ever, and then once you try and put it in the context of the greater piece, it changes in some sort of significant way? So I've written 3 sort of full musicals that got realized at this point. The hardest thing about writing them really is where do you start? Because it's like, I think the natural assumption is, well, there's got to be a big opener that gets the energy up and everyone's excited. The opener is actually the hardest thing to write in a musical because it has to establish everything in like the first, 5 to, if you're evil, 8 minutes of your show. And part of it can be a scene, but obviously it needs to be a song in some way. So generally, I don't start with the opener. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll write an opener, and I will make it just a song that can be bad. And I'll be like, great, that's done. And then I'll move on if I have to. I like to start with either what you would call the I Want song, which is your protagonist declaring to the world the thing they want, which then, of course, drives the whole plot of the musical, or the villain's sort of song, or the villain scene if the villain doesn't have a song. And the reason I like to do that is because the villain and the protagonist are the things driving your story. Right.
And depending on the story, one of them might be driving it more than the other. If you nail one of those, not only is it like easier to write because you're not worried about the whole story. You're just worried about this one character and conveying their whole deal in like chords or sounds. And if you nail one of those two, not only do you now have a song that you probably won't have to rewrite too much, you establish an option for the sound of your show. Because something unspoken, I think, in writing musicals is that, well, not unspoken, but like, you know, is that go listen to your favorite musical and notice how many times they use the same musical motif, sort of thing. I can't think of any specific example off the top of my head, but like there are these recurring sort of like sounds that occur a lot in musical theater. And they're sort of called themes. Sometimes they're called motifs, whatever it is. And it's just kind of like some musicals write a theme for each character. And then they weave that musical idea, like maybe it's usually as simple as like 3 notes, do, 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 you know, and then they'll weave that sort of idea throughout the show. And that is, I think, the thing that when people talk about like, oh, this musical felt like it really flowed, it's usually that. It's usually that the composer is stitching these themes into their songs in a way that makes everything feel cohesive. And so that's why I start there. I will say that there is nothing wrong with just going in, writing a song, and having it fall apart when you get further into the process. What I have learned is that by starting with what's clearer to you, rather than the world of the show, which is usually what the opener or the closer does, it's much easier to be clear and concise and specific, which is what all your songs need to be to feel unique. And by doing that, you will, I think, run into a lot less take this out 2 months from now situations. That would be my 10 cents, I think.
Yeah. And sort of kind of like piggybacking over the earlier question I asked you, when it is you solely writing in this process and you're making all these things, what do you do to decide what will make it in the show and what won't? Like, how do you choose which babies to kill and which ones are like, oh, this goes? And like, have there been any points in your process where like, I just wrote the best song ever made and it is just not working, or like it just needs to like change, but like it's hard because that's oftentimes I find like that's a pro of working with somebody else, is they'll tell you like, hey, this isn't working, but like when it's just you, what's preventing you from writing a 4-hour long beautiful
I think what happens is you always have to accept that your first draft, unless you are working on a established timeline of like, this cannot be longer than 90 minutes sort of thing, your first draft is probably going to be the longest and least coherent version of your story that will ever exist. Awesome. You will probably walk away with like 25 songs of varying quality and like 200 something pages of varying quality. What I do is I'll write a first draft and I will let it be whatever it is, even if it's the worst thing I've ever written. And I will do everything in my power, though I fail all the time, to not judge it. And then when I have to judge it, I will. But I'll judge it and not change it. I'll take a note of like, this is the worst line of dialogue I've ever written and it cannot go up. But I won't change it. And then once I have the whole thing in front of me, I'll look at it. And I will go, because I am not a structure person. Some people write by outlining. And they'll go, this is my character's want. This is my character's need. This is my, you know, and all those words we use. I have to write as if I'm the actor in the scene. So all the dialogue I write is based off of what just got written. So, for example, if a character just said, I don't want to go to the pretzel stand with you, right?
Wow.
Incredible conflict established.
Yes.
I'm not thinking about the quip they might have. I'm just writing what I would say if someone said, I don't want to go to the pretzel stand with you, which usually is, why not? Or please, and it just is the most obvious choice. So you write all that. Once I have the whole thing in front of me, I can start to sit down and go, okay, I thought that this character was on a journey that was like, I thought this character wanted, to go to the pretzel stand with this other character. But actually what they wanted is for that character to say they love them. Sort of thing of like, what's the deeper meaning of the pretzel stand? Once I know that, oh, there's a deeper truth to this character, like, you don't just want to eat a pretzel, you feel you're incapable of being loved. I can go back and look at not just what that character says throughout the show and sings for a musical, but also what all the other characters are saying and singing to them, and then start to go, is this line or this lyric helping or hurting the character's want? And generally it should be hurting it, unless we're at the end of the show. Awesome. So that's what I'll do. Sometimes you nail it on the first go. Sometimes it takes about 6 rewrites before you think you even know what you're doing. So it all depends on that. But I think to really nail it, it's about learning who your characters are and accepting them no matter what they are, or even if you don't really understand them completely, or aren't sure you want to do that. Right. Because sometimes the characters will surprise you. You will learn that, and it'll be things that the audience will never know. Like, you'll learn that this character is a real narcissist, and you didn't understand that when you wrote them. And so I think that gets really interesting.
Yeah. Justin, thank you so much for all this, incredibly awesome breakdown.
Of course.
I have the worst news of all time, and that's we're getting close to the end of our time. And so I wanted to offer you these last few moments if you had any closing or finishing thoughts about the process of making beautiful musicals.
Yeah, I think it's hard.
And there you have it.
and it's hard, and I think it's hard on purpose. Because at the end of the day, it is a showcase of how incredible that we put all this together and you get to watch it and feel like it exists only for you. Because it's hard, you should approach it not with the desire to I want to write the best thing ever and I want to make this thing. If you're trying to get into musical theater because you want to make $1 million, do literally anything else. You will not accomplish that goal, particularly. But I think that if you are someone who enjoys music, enjoys writing, and has thought about doing a musical or writing a musical, or you have an idea for a musical, I would encourage you to write something and see what it is. And maybe it's a song, maybe it's one line that a character will say at some point, and just sit with it, let it sit on the page. If you got to walk away from it for 2 months, walk away from it for 2 months. But just see what comes out of just sitting down one day and saying, maybe I can do this. And maybe it will be nothing, but maybe it will be the beginning of a 7-year process where you slowly lose your mind like I have, and this is now your career. So go for it, because you really have nothing to lose, and it could be fun.
Awesome. Beautiful words to end on. Thank you so much for being here, Justin.
Of course. It
is always a pleasure. Now I truly see the inner machinations of your dark, twisted mind. And you're crazy.
I am. It's quite frightening.
And it's beautiful. Always love your work. Check out Justin at Justin Jacobs. Check out At Which Please Musical.
Yeah.
A musical you just made.
I did.
Actually the best musical ever made. I'm not biased at all. It's just objectively really good.
You can follow it on whichplease_musical on Instagram, and you can look me up at justinjacobsmd.com. If you want to work with me, or you want to know more about writing musicals, you just want to connect and chat and be weird, let's do it.
Let's do it. And thank you Thank you.
Of
Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, listeners, for also being here in spirit. I don't see any of you because this is the radio, but I trust you're here. And I appreciate that. We will see you all next week. We got another guest lined up. Don't you even worry. And this next week's episode is sure to get real crazy. So you won't want to miss it. I'll see you all around. Make sure you stay passionate. Adios. And now we breathe. And now we breathe. All is well. All is well.
What a good time.
Right? This is very fun.